Are you ready to start creating solutions in healthcare? Hi, I'm Dan Kendall, the founder of Health Podcast Network, and I want to let you know about a podcast I think you'll love. It's called Nurse Rosa's Insights, and it's hosted by Rosa Hart. Rosa interviews healthcare leaders and innovators to uncover the challenges they face in their specialties and the creative solutions they're bringing to the table. With her background as a neuro-ICU nurse, stroke nurse navigator, and award-winning podcaster, Rosa brings a unique perspective and passion for elevating care for both nurses and patients. Listen and follow Nurse Rosa's Insights on your favorite podcast app, and you can find all the links you need at healthpodcastnetwork.com/Rosa. That's healthpodcastnetwork.com/Rosa.
And we've been getting rave reviews. We're enjoying it so much by creating this service for nurse practitioners. We know that we are helping lower anxiety, increase, your self-efficacy, and decrease imposter syndrome, and just realize that we are bridging those gaps and helping them get to efficiency and proficiency faster.
What kinds of side income streams and career alternatives can nurse practitioners explore? And what are the other options that nurse practitioners need to consider when it comes to their career? Let's talk all about it with nurse practitioner and host of the Success NP podcast and the Success NP Empire, Dr. Sandra Pagenta, right here in episode 506 of the Nurse Keith Show. Hey there, this is Nurse Keith. This podcast is about you and your personal professional development, your career, and the healthcare system writ large. I'm always here to share education, ideas, and informative interviews with some of the most inspiring people from the worlds of healthcare, nursing, medicine, entrepreneurship, and beyond. I love having you along for the ride, and I thank you from the bottom of my nurse podcaster's heart for being part of the growing Nurse Keith Nation. If you'd like to help other people find the show, you can leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. That is super duper helpful. You can become a patron at Patreon. That's patreon.com/Nurse Keith, or just share the show with anyone who you think might be getting something out of it or would enjoy it. And no matter how you're interacting with us here at the Nurse Keith Show, I appreciate it very, very, very much. Please head over to nursekeith.com to find the show notes for the episode. They can also be found on any app where you're listening on that device that you hold in your hand about 27 hours a day. And as I said, we're here today with Sandra Pagenta, Dr. Sandra Pagenta. She is a doctorally prepared nurse practitioner, the host of the Success NP podcast, and a whole lot more. And Sandra, it's really great to have you here. You're such an awesome, high energy, positive person. And I wanted to start by asking you a question about when you first became an NP. So when you first graduated from school, what did you think your NP career was going to look like?
Oh man, if you would have told me that it looked like it did today, I would have laughed. But at the time, what I figured, which I need to first start off by saying, thank you for the warm introduction. That was wonderfully said.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for having me on. Let's just start there. I'm such a worker. I'm ready to jump right into the work. So I wanted to say that at least. But as far as the question you asked me, I thought it would look like the traditional role of working in a clinic, seeing patients, kind of like what I did with my preceptorship as a student, and kind of doing that Monday through Friday grind. I saw it and envisioned it that way as just the basic package, the standard package NP job of Monday through Friday, seeing patients in clinic. Really didn't spend a whole ton of time researching what I could do with that degree because I just knew that nursing was hard and I didn't see myself doing that career long term. So that's kind of the short answer, the truthful answer to that question.
Okay. And then when you first jumped into being a nurse practitioner, was that what you were doing? Were you doing the Monday through Friday, like clinic work, or were you working in acute care? What was the scenario?
Yeah. So I had that standard package, McDonald's, combo number one type job, right? So I was working in this, Monday through Friday in clinic, 8 to 5, And I was fine with that to a certain extent because it did feel like that was what everybody else was doing. Does that make sense?
That does. And
Yeah.
what I hear from so many people who are nurses who then become NPs, that they often become very disillusioned because they find that, especially the FNPs who are just working in a clinic setting, or adult geri NPs who are working in clinic, that they feel like they're square pegs getting pounded into the round hole of 15-minute visits, which they were not prepared for, which doesn't fit with the nursing paradigm and the way of looking at holistic patient care. And they're quickly disillusioned by how they're just caught up in the machinations of the healthcare system. And they find they're actually able to be less effective than they were as an RN because they actually have less time with patients. And all they're doing is like pushing papers and trying to make sure, stuff is set up right so that it's approved by insurance companies and stuff like that. So how long did you last in that traditional, Happy Meal, McDonald's Happy Meal kind of, or unhappy meal NP career trajectory?
Yeah, that's actually great, Keith. It is so funny. I lasted 4 years before I was fired. Okay.
Wow.
So I actually tell this story all the time wherever I go. It's probably like my little like scarlet letter of I was fired from my first NP job. I'd actually done a really good job at falling asleep at the job. So what I was doing is I was just going in, doing the drudgery work, whatever they told me to do, I just did. Sandra, go over there, go do this. We're going to change your role a little bit. And so I just kind of fell asleep at the wheel. And I got this rude awakening after having this job for about 4 years. That I wasn't generating my income. So what you don't realize when you go from the nurse to the nurse practitioner role, at least I didn't, and maybe I'm just not that smart, but I didn't realize that I needed to be generating income. I'm an income generating provider, whereas the nurse, you're a line item, right? You are included in the cost of the room. Whereas when you're a nurse practitioner, you got to be making your money. So I just assumed that there was somebody paying for me. And so when I got fired, because there was no money to pay my salary for the next year, it was a wake up call. Wait, I'm supposed to be doing what? And so when I began to realize that I needed to be making money, it then became very important for me to figure out, well, how do I make money as a nurse practitioner? So that was a journey that kind of started me off on looking for careers where it became really easy to know, oh, I'm generating my income because I'm doing procedures. So I actually set out to find a procedure-based job as a nurse practitioner. And there's so many procedures that you can do that generate very good income. And they really do support you and support the company that you work with for keeping your role there. So that became the focus. And it actually ended up being super great because I found that I could do a lot of really cool things as an NP with my hands, and that I could create and generate skill set that I didn't have that made me special, right? And so that became the new pursuit for my career until I had my son. And so that's kind of another birth, another Phoenix rising story. But that's the answer to that question, is that I then began pursuing careers that I could say, I know how I generate money by doing X amount of procedures a day, 5 times a day. So it just became a more calculated career move for me.
Oh, well, thanks for elucidating that dynamic of you go from being a RN who's a line item and included in the cost of the room to being a nurse practitioner who actually has to show productivity and actually generate income. So I don't want to dwell on this too long because I want to get to all this other cool stuff you do. But what did you find were some examples of procedures that you could do as an NP that were actually kind of cool, that you enjoyed, and that generated income for your employer and thus consequently for you?
Yes. So I was working in GI when I was fired, and I remember asking if I could do procedures, and they told me no, because of the way that the GI system or the GI specialty is structured, that's really an MD area, right? So colonoscopies, sigmoidoscopies, upper endoscopies, that's kind of a GI doc, GI doc's domain. But what I looked for was what other specialties allow nurse practitioners to get their hands dirty, right? Like, where can I get my hands dirty? And so what I found was neurosurgery was very open to NPs getting in the mix, getting in the OR, getting into operating room, and those different procedures they could do, scrub in, help with, harvesting certain parts of the body. I really wanted to do that. And I found that urology was super open too, because there's just so much work to go around that the urologists leave the simpler procedures to the nurse practitioners that can become very proficient, and they do the harder stuff, right? So they're doing the stuff that a nurse practitioner shouldn't be doing. So they're cutting out kidneys, they're, redirecting ureters, they're doing really cool stuff that we just don't have the scope for. But the things that they felt like that were in our scope and appropriate, and that once we showed proficiency in, we could do, I was able to do. So I was doing cystoscopies. I was removing simple bladder tumors out with laser procedures. I was assisting in cystograms where we put dye up into the bladder, dye up into the kidneys. I was able to do very cool procedures that I would have never dreamed as a girl getting fired, being told you can't do procedures, to then sitting in the room. And I'll never forget the day that I went into the operating room because they didn't have a provider. And they were like, hey, Sandra does these really, really well. Let her go and run the OR. And I was like, you want to send me where? And so it was just such a kind of this redemptive moment to watch this kind of evolution of being told, no, nurse practitioners can't do this, to, no, this is what you can do. Like, this is super neat. And this is what this degree buys you a ticket to go and do if you want to use it that way.
That's really awesome. So I love having you illustrate that and how that worked out for you. But then you had your son, and I think there's a big transition that happened then. And is that how you made the decision to move into this new endeavor?
Yeah. So working for an employer is great until you need a level of time freedom, right? So working and having somebody say when you have to clock in and punch out is fine. When you're a free spirit female, you're, independent woman, we're my single ladies, Beyonce, like all of a sudden there's a big change, right? And so now when he came into the world and I watched him walk across the operating room, my entire life had now shifted to, oh my goodness, I want to be able to be there and to watch him grow and to be that mom that's present and not having to leave all the time. And so that created a big shift for me as well, because I realized at that time, here I am at another precipice. I have gone from understanding I gotta make money to now realizing I can do that. I can actually do procedures, which is pretty cool. And now my search and my goal is time freedom. And I've done nothing to generate that. And that's really everything. And so you and I have talked before the podcast that like, this is something that more nurses and nurse practitioners need to hear, is that you can actually do both. I could actually cultivate a career that I love and then also begin to cultivate things that do give a level of time freedom if you invest in them. And so that became the new pursuit for me. And I became less focused in on my W-2s. So how do we generate something that can pay us without having to clock in and swipe the badge and swipe the card and clock in and clock out? How do I do that? And that's become the new pursuit for my career.
Yeah. And what was it that you then decided to create?
Yeah. So I decided in the quiet moments, well, first I talked to my husband and I said, what am I good at? I don't know what I'm good at. I'm good to work with my hands. I'm enjoying that with my job. What am I good at? And he's like, you don't stop talking. Like you just are constantly talking. And so I said, all right, well, what can I do that talks to people and might be able to generate revenue? I don't know. We got to give it a try. And so I developed the Dr. Nurse podcast. That was my first endeavor. And then through that podcast, I had a conversation with the CEO of NP Hub, and he and I were just organically talking. And he shared something that blew my mind. Well, actually, I blew his mind and then he blew my mind back. I had shared that we were going to create digital clinical workbooks, my girlfriend and I, for our students that came to be precepted by us in practice. And so he loved the idea and he was like, I want you to make that for my business. And I said, okay, you want me to do what? And so I ended up getting to be in a partnership with him, creating clinical booklets. And then we use those clinical booklets and we've adapted them, improved them. We're continually working on them. And we actually sell these booklets in my Etsy shop. And people are loving them. NPs, NP students, new NPs, they're loving our clinical booklets and what we've created to help them in their clinical pursuit. Because what we noticed was that so many nurse practitioners would go to school and it was hard to find preceptors. Some of the preceptor experiences were terrible, right? You were just like wanted to get out. Jackie's told me about how she had to like hound this doctor to take her as a student. And she's like, I swear I'm a normal person. Please just let me come along. And so we're in these awkward situations with preceptorships. And then we get into practice and we're the only NP at our facility. We've got 3 docs that think we're just supposed to hit the ground running and generating revenue. And yet sometimes we feel unprepared, right? And so that imposter syndrome sets in, all the anxiety associated with that. And so we said, is there a way that we can fill that gap, that we can just kind of clip some of those feelings that NPs are having? And so we created the digital workbook and the clinical booklet with our Etsy shop to do exactly that. And we've been getting rave reviews. We're enjoying it so much by creating this service for nurse practitioners. We know that we are helping lower anxiety, increase, your self-efficacy, and decrease imposter syndrome, and just realize that we are bridging those gaps and helping them get to efficiency and proficiency faster.
That's great. I love your enthusiasm about it. And so you're creating, these aren't physical books, these are digital workbooks. So it's nothing that gets printed or shipped or anything like that, right? So they're clinical, they're digital clinical resources that NPs and NP students specifically can access through Etsy, and they can then use them and are they super focused on like really narrow topic areas, or are they very broad?
Yeah. So we actually created 5 domains. We have family, adult, peds, psych, and women's health. So we've got a bundle where you can get all of them, depending on if you're like, I still don't know what I'm doing. So you want all of them, or you can just get the individual tracks, right? And so you can actually print them at home. So we don't do the mass production, but we've made them and we formatted them in a way that if you want to print them, because I'm an elder millennial, right? Like I like my paper. I do.
Mm-hmm.
I like that tree. I want to be able to touch the tree, write on the tree. And so I would prefer a physical copy. Some, Gen Zers, we love them. They're all about like less books. And so we want to be able to appeal to both.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have that option on there, but we do not print them. We just offer them in a printable form. And you can easily just take it up to like Xerox, Kinko's, and just have them bind it for you. And that's what some of the students have shared their booklets with us, that they've printed them and they showed us like, I put them together, I laminated it and put it in. And so it's really great and easy. That's how we designed it.
That's really smart. So you did what a lot of business people actually do. You identified a target population, a target customer base. You saw a need that they had, and you decided to create a product or service. In your case, it's a product that fulfills the need of that target market. So that's like business 101, right? So that's really smart. And an outgrowth of that is your podcast, the Success NPs podcast, which I'd like to talk about too. So when we come back from the break, and I can't believe we've already vaporized like almost a half hour. But when we come back from the break, I want to talk about the podcast, and I want to talk about the work that you all do through that, and just basically all the different permutations of what an NP might consider doing if they don't want to do that 9 to 5 or 8 to 4 grind that you and I talked about at the top of the show. So hang in there with us, and we'll be right back for the second half of the episode. And we're with Dr. Sandra Pagenta of the Success NP podcast and beyond. Hey everyone, let's take a quick pause for the cause, shall we? If you're in need of personalized, holistic career coaching to elevate your nursing and healthcare career, look no further than nursekeith.com and Nurse Keith Coaching. I can help you with your job search and interview strategies, resume and cover letter optimization, LinkedIn maximization, and envisioning the future of your career. I can also support you in launching your own business, learning how to write and blog as a side hustle, or launch your own podcast. And please note that you can receive 10% off your first coaching package if you mention the show. So email me at keith@nursekeith.com to schedule a complimentary 30-minute strategy session. Now, let's get back to the episode at hand. And welcome back to the second half of the episode. We're here again with friend of the pod and my friend and colleague, Dr. Sandra Pagenta. And Sandra, just for a moment, I want to ask about your nursing career and how you got to the NP place. So did you work for many, many years as a registered nurse? Did you have a lot of time before you transitioned to the NP space?
Oh man. Yeah. So I was a nurse. I was just telling my husband, because I was like sitting there one day, I was like, I've been a nurse for 50 years. Like I was starting to do that thing. And then I was like, no, really, how long has it been? And so I think I was an RN, to be honest with you, for about 5 solid years before I became an NP, because I could tell pretty quickly after becoming an RN that for me, and again, I don't think I spent enough time in the RN space to really see what it could do for me. But I knew I loved the nurse practitioner role. So it didn't take me very long for me to go back. So I probably worked for a solid year, worked on my GRE, all the doctoral, like the master's paperwork prereqs. And then I worked part-time as I went to school for my master's degree. So I probably was a nurse for a solid 3 to 4 years. And then when I lost my job, as I was describing in the earlier episode, the early part of the episode, that I lost my job, I actually went back to nursing, Keith, while I was looking for a nurse practitioner job, because it was so easy just to get started and to get back in. So I said, I'll take a per diem job. I'll just work a couple of days just to keep the income flowing. So I went back as a doctorally prepared nurse practitioner and became an RN. And let me tell you something, Keith, it was so nice. There was a level of responsibility, absenteeism, that kind of just going into work and not feeling like it was following me home, like the NP role did, was actually very nice. I mean, and then also kind of like what you were describing earlier about focusing in on the patient and getting back to that root of why we went into medicine and why we went into healthcare. That became actually kind of nice to go back to it too. So I actually was working in all different fields. So this is when, because I was a little more seasoned, I was like, I want to do interventional radiology and I want to go and try. And so I started working in the per diem pool and just floated all throughout the hospital. I was like, I can figure it out. Like, put me over here. And so I got to do some really cool stuff as a doctorally prepared nurse practitioner, working as a nurse again. So I probably did that for about 5 or 6 months, and they didn't want me to leave. What was the funniest part is the guy that had hired me was like, are you sure? As a nurse practitioner? Because I was having so much fun. I mean, I really was.
That's great. Some NPs who find through various circumstances that they need to work as an RN for a while feel that, or have experienced that it's hard to get a job as an RN because people feel you're overqualified. But it sounds like you found the right milieu where you could do that. So that's great. And Quick question I have for you, just to clarify. Are you working clinically now, or are you really focused on your side hustles like the podcast and the workbooks and all that?
Yeah. So Keith, I don't stop, my friend. So I am working clinically and doing all the other things as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I do both. The one of the things that I didn't share earlier was that when I had my son, and I decided to kind of pivot my career, that pivot was me going part-time.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually spent a lot of time writing content around that, because I think more women need to hear that it's okay if your career isn't everything while you're a mom. And so I believe that women are seasonal. We're seasonal within the months hormonally. We're seasonal, within our life with what we do as far as motherhood and working. And so I have kind of shifted for what works for me to a more part-time role as a nurse practitioner. And so getting that work-life balance is something that I've been really hearing and reading a lot about is beneficial for the well-being of mothers. And so I've stepped my career into that space. Now, again, if you would have told me, wait, you're a part-time nurse practitioner, Sandra, like what? Yeah, it's something that surprised me, but has been so wonderful for feeling like I'm a present mom. I have space to go do the things that I enjoy, like podcasting and digitally creating. And then also I get work? Yeah. And then I get to go to work and do something clinical that still keeps me in the game and allows me to kind of keep up my skills as an NP.
Well, that's cool. That's a nice balance. And how old is your son right now?
My son is 5.
He's 5. Yeah, I thought he was just barely school age. So,
yeah.
You've chosen to create a lifestyle and work style that works for you, being a mom of a young child. And then, as he grows and maybe becomes a preteen and then a teenager, I'm sorry to disillusion you that he will become a teenager eventually. And he will I know he will learn to drive, and he will go off to college and get married and all those things. So just be prepared.
Yes.
So that's sort of like a setup for you to be able to pivot again, maybe in 5 or 6 years when he's 12 or 13 or something, or 14, when you feel like you can pivot again and do something else or do another combination, because he's not going to need you as much, I'm afraid. So,
don't tell me that, Keith. Don't tell me that. Okay.
Sorry,
I'm not ready for it. My heart's not ready for it.
He'll need you forever. So for NPs who want to create, they want just something a little different. They don't want to do the 8 to 4 grind, and they're willing maybe to give up the full W-2 thing and maybe have their own business. So side income streams are a thing. A lot of people have them. You're doing this thing on Etsy. You're creating these digital clinical resources and workbooks for NPs and NP students. So do you feel like the world's your oyster when you're an NP and you can have these different permutations of what your career might look like?
Oh, such a great question. I feel like I could sit here like for hours. So I actually take my career and I talk about dials, and I like the dial analogy, because you don't necessarily have to be a nurse practitioner for these dials to exist in our career. And so I never recommend just quitting your W-2, because if you're a mom with responsibilities, most of the time, if you're a nurse practitioner, you're a little bit older, you might have a husband, some other responsibilities. It's kind of hard to just walk away completely. I really advocate for maybe taking a lesser role, maybe starting a little part-time thing with your career, and then supplementing kind of like with like a dials on an oven, And so you kind of turn up the one burner in the back, maybe you turn it half staff, you're only doing a little bit back there. You got that pot sizzling, and then maybe you pick up something that you enjoy. And that part, that's what I talk about on my podcast too, about quieting your soul and just seeing what kind of comes up. A lot of nurses will describe having an event, almost kind of like how we do with med-airs, like a sentinel event. You'll kind of have this event where you'll kind of go like, I had my, hysterectomy and I had to be on my back for 3 hours, and or I had to stay on my back for 3 days. And I started doodling. This is what one of the nurses told me on my podcast. I started doodling. And my husband, when I fell asleep, had like published her doodle somewhere and like put it on and it was selling. And he was like, this is good. Like you can actually sell this. And so it ended up being this moment where she pivoted from working as a nurse full time to starting to create digital booklets. And so I always describe, one, get quiet and listen to hear what you're good at. Ask other people if you're not someone that's in tune to it. So what am I good at? And then again, turning up the different dials in your career and going, I want a little bit of aesthetics. Maybe I'm not enjoying that. Or I want maybe like 1 or 2 days in the hospital because I don't want to get too burned out. That's a way to like prevent that, is to not always be there and depend on that for income. And by diversifying your income, almost like what they say, invest in mutual funds. Don't just be all in Apple stock, because if you're just in Apple stock and Apple stock goes down, now you got nothing, right? But nurses don't think that. We just think, oh, the hospital is the only way to make money. And that's not true. Like, you can get a little IV hydration business on the side. Maybe you do that 1 day a week. I don't know. Maybe you do it 1 day a month. And maybe you are really good at crocheting and you enjoy that. And so you start to crochet cute little, I don't know, little figurines for nurses and you sell them on Etsy. Like, and that's just how you relax and how you hobby life. Like it's just kind of these dials analogy. I don't know if that's making any sense because they can't see my hands and my hands are all over the place. But as you kind of turn up and you turn down things, you might be able to find a niche for yourself that actually kind of feels a little more fulfilled and not so reliant just on one thing. And I think sometimes we do that and we break our backs, we break our souls with the work that we do because we put all our eggs in one basket. And trust me, you will look back at your career and think, oh man, was there anything else that I could have done for me that I would have enjoyed? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And you're like, well, my basket seems very monochromatic and I need something else in my basket. I get that. I've done so many things and I do many things, and I'm even in transition on different levels in my career now. So I have some stuff going on that I'm considering. So, in terms of the podcast, what do you like about podcasting, and what do you think your listeners get the most of when they listen to your podcast? What are they coming back for?
That's a good question, because I don't think I've done a good job at polling people and seeing like, what is it that you love? What I'm trying to create is a place where they can be empowered about their careers. Because I remember that mom after I had Benji, where I was just sitting there and thinking, I don't know what my options are. And that's a really scary place to be when you don't know what you don't know. And so I want to create a space where NPs can learn about different career options, not be afraid, because fear is such a big part of getting out and doing different things. The fear of failure, the fear of what people are going to think about me, the fear of not doing it right. And I just want to reframe all that stuff. So the podcast is just a mindset shift. It's an empowerment. It is see one, do one. It's just, what does it look like to be successful for you? So at the end of your life, when you get to that space, you can look back and say, that was what success looked like for me. And I pursued that with my whole heart. Like, that's what I want. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I'm trying to cultivate.
Makes a lot of sense. And you're getting it across very, very well. So you want people to come to the Success NPs podcast to get some inspiration and a shot in the arm about what's possible. Like, you're looking at what's possible. And your story is a direct illustration of what's possible, right? So you were a nurse, then you decided to become an NP. You had this weird thing happen and you got fired. So you went back working as an RN. And then you realized that like doing procedures was a way to be an NP, like getting your hands dirty. And I hope you washed your hands too, but getting your hands dirty and doing stuff that felt like direct and here you were like directing the OR one day, like you were in charge of the OR. It's like you never would have imagined that might have happened, right? So, and then your husband said you don't stop talking, so having a podcast makes sense, right? And creating these digital clinical resources, these workbooks make sense too, because you see a need and people are responding, showing you like, hey, I printed it, I laminated it, look what I did, I bound it, so you know that what you're doing is out there in the world and it's helping people. So I think that's a good mix of being able to accomplish all that and then also be a mom and feel like like you were saying, you're present for your child, right? Who's
Yeah.
5 years old.
I have two kids.
Oh, how old is the other one?
The other one is 2. I have a 5-year-old. She's about to be 2 in like 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
Oh,
yeah.
I thought it was only the 5-year-old.
No, I
there's
got
a
2.
2-year-old too. Okay.
Yeah.
So now, remember when I was saying that maybe you'll transition when your 5-year-old becomes a teenager, but now I realize when your 5-year-old's 13, your 2-year-old will only be 10.
Yeah.
So you have a lot to think about, and it sounds like you're very pivot friendly, right? Like you can use that if you want. So you're pivot friendly and you're
career
willing.
Fluid. You
Yeah.
call it career fluid, whatever.
Fluid. Yeah. We have gender fluid. You're career fluid. So you're
Shout out, Keith.
so you're really into, and it sounds like your husband is supportive of you creating a lifestyle and work style that basically molds to your family's needs. That's what I'm getting, right?
Yes. 100%. 100%.
Yeah. And until your kids are launched and, really out in the world, then you're just going to keep watching, being aware, and pivoting as needed, I guess, right?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
And that's what I want nurses and nurse practitioners to hear, that we have picked a career that is perfect for this. And it should be perfect because the career, like I said, is mostly female, which I think it's interesting talking to you about this because women, like I said, are seasonal. Our times and our seasons are different as our focus changes. And so this career should be forgiving for these things. It should allow a nurse to come back after a period of time, to step back in, to move in and out, and to kind of have this influx of we shape shift to what is needed. And I think that if we were to be honest with ourselves, we would say, this is what I need for myself right now. And you chose perfectly if that's something that you want. And I can show you other things. But like you're saying, this is your journey. This has been what you've been doing. And I'm trying to show others that you can do it too. Like it doesn't have to just be, I'm not special. Like I've just set my mind on this. And so we move in that space and it works.
Right. And now here's something, we can't go down this rabbit hole because we don't have time, but I just want to say it anyway. What really, really bothers me is that when, let's say a nurse who's a mom takes a couple years off to have children or whatever, right? And then they try to go back into the workforce, and what they hear is like, what's this gap on your resume all about? And I'm like, that is so maddening. That makes me absolutely livid that employers and HR people make this big deal about, oh, what's this 9-month gap in your resume? I'm like, what business is it of yours what I was doing for 9 months? Maybe I went to Turkey and I was hitchhiking for 9 months. What do you care? Just because, there's this whole thing about you've lost your skills because you haven't been working for the last 7 months. It's like people need to have flexibility. They need to be able to take time off. They need to go out and experiment. And the marketplace, I think, often tells us that you've got to keep your nose to the grindstone. You can't take more than 2 weeks off at a time or someone's going to look at your resume and freak out. And I think people like you and me, we've carved other types of pathways, and you just have to kind of fight against those norms that try to drive you, like I was saying earlier, the square peg in the round hole, like those hammers that want to hammer you into that. You have to push back against it. It's really hard, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell this, I always say this, but if you really want something done, give it to a mom. Give her like 45 minutes. I've become so time efficient since having children. I wasted so much time as a single woman. And now as a mom, I'm like, are you kidding me? If I want something done, I'm going to find a mom because she'll somehow make it happen. She'll somehow do that and keep the kid alive and do. So it's funny that you say exactly that. Why do you look at that as something negative on a woman's record when in fact, they've been doing the hardest job, the most important job, which is keeping our civilization and society decent, populated with people. I mean, it's just, unfortunately, there is such a big gender difference between the loads that we carry as genders. And so I just think that because it's a woman dominated field, right? Like 80 or 70 to 80% of nurses are women. And so it's like, we need to allow this space for women to be able to go, I can't right now. This is what I'm able to do right now. And I want one day because it's kind of nice to get out of the house one day. That's what I want. Maybe a mom feels that way. It's nice to like get back in there and take care of a patient or, whatever it is. I just think that we need to be more open to that. So I talk a lot about that. I have talked a lot about that on my podcast too. It's important. Opening up that. Yeah, I agree. Well said.
Yeah. And I want someone someday to write me or call me and tell me that they were in a job interview and the interviewer asked them about like this 14-month gap on their resume. And they just said to the interviewer, it's none of your business, just hire me. Okay. And I want someone to be able to do that and get hired because it is none of their business. I'm sorry. So thanks for, paving the way for that, for people to be able to say that they can do it the way they want. And, I'd love to keep talking, but we do have to wind down. And before we go, I want to remind people to go to successnps.com, and it's successnps.com. And that's where you can find the podcast and link to the Etsy shop and the digital books and the workbooks. And then we'll have links to your Facebook, Instagram, your X, and your LinkedIn profiles so everyone can find you. But I have 4 quick questions I ask everybody at the end of the show. Are you game for a little lightning round?
Yes, let's do it. Let's go.
Okay. So of everything there is to understand in the world, what's something about life or human nature that you'd really like to understand?
Oh, fear.
Fear?
Fear.
Tell me a little something about that.
I think that fear and the perception of what could go wrong, what could happen, these narratives that we tell ourselves, I think it holds us back from a lot of things in life. That as I watch people, I read this book. Sorry. Oh gosh. Your questions are supposed to be fast and I have to answer them quicker. I just remember a guy, I read a book. Oh, it's escaping me now. Where he talked about going to the edge. Oh, I think I remember. It's a terrible name and I can't say the name of the book. It's like The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Bad Word. And so he talks about going to the edge of the cliff and sitting there at the edge. And he says, I don't know if you read the book, but he's like, everything inside of his body is screaming to like get away from the edge. And he's like, I just kept going. I like went past that point, like knowing that like my palms are sweaty. I'm like hyperventilating and I just kept going towards the edge. And so it was just interesting because I think that fear is real, but I also don't think that fear is real. It's just a very like interesting thing. So I feel like if you're asking me a question, I would want to like understand that about our human nature, that it's there as a warning, but when do we say, it's okay, I'm going to do it anyway? Like, or is it a warning to keep going? Like, I'm afraid, but that means you're in the right spot. Like, I'm afraid, but keep going.
That's good. I like that.
I don't know. Does that make sense? I don't know.
That does. That's good. Okay. Yeah. So second question, who's one of your heroes? Could be living or dead, could be a really famous person, or it could be, someone from your very, very personal life.
Yeah. So I have one that immediately comes to mind. It's Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior. I mean, he died on the cross, so that's easy for me. And then my dad and my mom, both of them are the most incredible people. They make me who I am. They would do anything for me. And it's not a lot of people on earth that would just everything. You could have it. So
I get that.
Those are my people on the planet that
totally
are
get that.
incredible.
Yeah.
And then my husband, he's just this, just so many, there's so many heroes, but my husband he's solid. He's my rock. I'm the flighty little bird and he's just very steady. So
I wish people could have seen you right then making a little sign like you had wings, fluttery wings. That's good. Okay. Third question. You already mentioned a book, so you may have already answered the question, but is there a book or film that changed your life or just had a big impact on you? And pick a different one than the one you just mentioned so you can get another one in.
Yeah. The Bible. I mean, I feel like that's like classic. It just teaches you about everything in life. There isn't a topic it doesn't touch on, and it's always right. So read your Bible. Read your Bible.
You're not the first person to mention the Bible, so I get it. Yeah, there you go. Okay. Yeah. Last question. If you were named queen of the world tomorrow and you had ultimate power and you could do everything you wanted to do, everything, like you had unlimited power, what's the first thing you would do out of the gate to improve the lives of your subjects, meaning the citizens of the world? Your first action. You could do anything.
Wow. Keith, these are deep, man. This one's hard. I think what it brings up in me is like, what is it that people need? Like, what is it that people really need? And I think the world needs to believe that their community and the people around them are there for them. So I think people live longer in community. I think as a country, we would be healthier if we felt like people were for one another, genuinely, because I think it's really easy to judge others when you haven't walked in their shoes. And yet when you sit with someone and you meet them, you realize that we're really not that different. And so I think if I were to answer your question, I would just want people, if I had ultimate power, to feel like they had someone who understood them and that cared for them. I don't know.
That's lovely. That's a great place to start. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great, Sandra. I really want people to check out Success NP's podcast, and they can go to successnps.com. And I'm sure the podcast is on all the places where you find podcasts, Spotify, Apple, etc. And we'll have links to your Facebook, your Etsy, your Instagram, your X.com, and your LinkedIn. And thank you so much for gracing the airwaves. And thanks for doing all this great work in the world, being a mom and an awesome clinician. Thanks for being out there.
Keith, thanks for having me on, man. This was awesome. That you just like called me, put me on, and it's been such a joy to meet you. Thank you for your what you're doing for nurses everywhere. The content you create, I know as a fellow podcaster, is hard. So thank you for being an inspiration to me. As somebody that's done 500 episodes, that's insane, man. You're an inspiration to me. So thank you for having me on.
Thank you, my friend. Well, there you have it. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Nurse Keith Show. Remember, the show notes will be at nursekeith.com or right on the device where you're listening in the app that you choose to use for accessing podcasts. Please, while you're there, look up Success NP podcast and subscribe. I hope you feel uplifted and empowered from this episode. Please check out Nurse Keith Coaching and nursekeith.com. Mention the show and get 10% off your first career coaching package if you need me to help you with your career. Check out Patreon if you want to help support us at patreon.com/nursekeith. We're proud members of the Health Podcast Network at healthpodcastnetwork.com, and we are produced by Rob Johnston of 520R Podcasting. And before we say goodbye, I'll leave you with this quote by the musician Robert Fripp, and I think Sandra will appreciate this quote a lot. May my living honor my parents. May my living repay the debt of my existence. Be well, dig deep, seek joy, keep in touch. This is Nurse Keith saying adios till next time from beautiful Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the inimitable Sandra Pagenta saying arrivederci from
Gainesville, Florida.
All right. Thank you, Sandra. Thanks to everyone for listening, and we'll catch you on the proverbial flip side.